Okay, now you will recall that yesterday morning we started off with a voting exercise where you were forced to, make some choices about some of the key issues in Redd Plus. And what we're going to do now is revisit those exact same questions and answers. But as I said, we encourage you to consider changing your choice based on what you have learned over the last 24 hours. So while I'm giving these instructions, I'm going to invite selected members of the program committee to join me here on stage to be prepared to act as respondents and react to some of the voting results later on. So for those of you who have joined us since yesterday, you will find your handy voting device hanging on the seat in front of you or in your chair. And it's very simple. All you have to do is press the number that corresponds to the choice on the screen that corresponds to the best answer to any particular question. So everybody got one? Okay. All right, so to practice, we're going to start again by collecting the demographic data so we can slice it later on. And because you're not all sitting in the same chairs, we have to do it over again. You're not going to have much time to answer these questions. So first, how would you identify your primary institutional affiliation? Press 1 if you are government or intergovernment or multilateral. Press 2 if you are civil society or academia or other nonprofit, non-government. Press 3 if you are private sector. You have about 8 seconds to make this choice. Shouldn't be too hard. You already had time to practice yesterday. Okay, and the time is up. We're not going to show the results because it's not so interesting. Next question. How would you identify your primary Redd Plus geographic focus or expertise? Do you live in or work on Latin America? Press 1. Africa, press 2. Asia, press 3. Or if you work globally, pan-regional, press 4. And finally, the third demographic question, identify your gender as number 1 if you are male and number 2 if you are female. I don't think we needed 8 seconds for that one. Okay, so now we're going to move on to the substantive questions. And as I said yesterday, there is no single right answer to these questions. It's about choosing the best answer from your perspective. The only difference from yesterday is that when we present the results, we will do it in comparative perspective to how you voted yesterday to see if there's been any movement. Okay? Can we have question number 1? What is the most important element of the Paris Agreement for advancing Redd Plus objectives? Number 1, endorsement of Redd Plus in Article 5 to strengthen political legitimacy. Number 2, the ambitious overall goal of limiting warming to 2 degrees Celsius will focus attention on reducing forest emissions. Number 3, the language calling for balance between emissions and removals will focus attention on forests as sinks. Number 4, the endorsement of internationally transferred mitigation outcomes, ITMOs, will generate finance for Redd Plus. Or number 5, the submission and regular revision of nationally determined contributions, NDCs, will focus attention on implementation and enhanced ambition over time. You have 10 seconds. Okay, a quick look at the results for our panel. Looks like we strengthened the lead of the 5th answer about increasing ambition over time. Panel, note this result. All right, let's quickly go ahead to question number 2. And that is, what is the most important constraint on national level Redd Plus implementation, which was our discussions yesterday afternoon? The lack of awareness of the importance of forests to domestic development goals, insufficient international Redd Plus finance, weak domestic institutions, lack of political consensus on how to achieve Redd Plus objectives, or strong vested interests in deforestation as usual. You have 10 seconds. Okay, let's see the results. Again, we have a strengthening of the winner from yesterday. So can't read it from my screen, but the strong Vested interests in deforestation as usual. Okay, so those of you who went out and lobbied for your preferred answer, I think you did a good job. Okay, so moving on to question number 3. What is the most promising source of new and additional performance-based finance for REDD+? Would that be new pledges of public funding from bilateral donor agencies, REDD+ finance from the Green Climate Fund, markets for forest carbon offsets in industrialized countries, or domestic fiscal policies in developing countries? 10 seconds. And the winner is? Again, an enhancement of the winner yesterday, domestic fiscal policies in developing countries. And those of you who attended session 2A were given a tutorial in those possibilities. All right, moving on to question number 4. What is the biggest challenge for REDD+ initiatives in the context of transitions to peace? Is it pressure to kickstart economies and employment through logging operations, uncertain land tenure due to returnees and emerging legal reform, difficulty engaging all stakeholders when some may not yet trust the process? 10 seconds. This was the focus of 2B, as I recall. So some of you are well educated on this topic now. Oh, interesting. So a bit of a shift from the engagement to the tenure issue, I think. Okay. All right. Question number 5. What is the most important opportunity or risk linking REDD+ and Indigenous peoples? REDD+ provides opportunities to advance recognition of Indigenous peoples' rights. REDD+ finance can be channeled directly to Indigenous communities. REDD+ poses risks to Indigenous peoples, requiring a focus on safeguards implementation. 10 seconds. Yes, but answer number 1 was the winner yesterday, and it's even increased today. Okay. Question number 6. What is the most important constraint on REDD+ implementation at the scale of subnational jurisdictions? This was the focus of our discussions this morning. Insufficient support from national policies and institutions, insufficient finance from national and international sources, drivers of deforestation beyond the influence of the jurisdiction, state or province, insufficient political and economic incentives for transition to green growth paths, or a lack of coordination with commodity supply chain commitments. 10 seconds. Not as much change in that one, but a little bit more on the one that was the highest. Interesting pattern. Okay, question number 7. What is the most important constraint on REDD+ implementation at the project scale? And of course, that was the focus of session 4A, if I'm not mistaken. Is it insufficient finance to provide meaningful incentives, drivers of deforestation outside the influence of the project, inability to resolve land tenure issues at project scale, or achieving equitable benefit sharing within communities and households? 10 seconds. Interesting. Drop in finance as a key constraint. That's interesting. So maybe it's not about the money. Okay, question number 8. What is the most promising application of new technology to support REDD+ implementation? Is it mapping of indigenous local community and smallholder lands to achieve legal status? Is it enhanced monitoring to support forest law enforcement? Is it enhanced monitoring to implement commodity supply chain commitments? Or is it more accurate measurement of emissions from deforestation and forest degradation? 10 seconds. Okay, a downtick in the mapping and an uptick in the more accurate measurement of emissions. Interesting. Okay, question number 9. Moving forward, at what level should REDD+ proponents target relatively more of their attention compared to now? Should we focus more attention at the level of local projects, more at the level of subnational jurisdictions, more at the national level, or more at the international level? 10 seconds. Okay, well, again, we have an enhancement of the question, that the answer that was the winner yesterday, at the level of subnational jurisdictions. Okay, last question. Looking ahead, what is the best way, in your opinion, to secure permanence in REDD+ results? Is it to ensure that REDD+ is embedded in all relevant nationally determined contributions? Is it to increase emphasis on rights and governance in national REDD+ programs? Is it to make stronger links between REDD+ and domestic green economy transitions? Is it to make stronger links between REDD+ and private sector commodity supply chain commitments? Or is it to increase the level and certainty of performance-based REDD+ finance? 10 seconds. Okay, some adjustments in that one, not too much change. All right, well, kind of interesting. What I'm going to do is pose a couple of questions to our members of the program committee to give them a chance to give us any insights that they may have on the voting results overall, and including any change between yesterday and today. And it's also a lead-in for them to share with us any highlights that they picked up from some of the sessions that they participated in related to some of the issues that we've been discussing. So, Heidi Bade from NORAD. I know that you were very much involved in the session related to the role of REDD+ in transitions to peace. So I particularly want you to comment on that one, but you're also free to comment on any of the others, and we'll try to move to the right graph as quickly as possible to support what you're going to say. You want to start with the transitions to peace one? Okay, yeah. So question number 4.
Thank you, Francis. So question number 4 on REDD in post-conflict settings. We pretty much agreed with ourselves today compared to yesterday.
Number 4. We're not. Hang on just a second. Can we get number 4 out? Question number 4.
I can.
There we go.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. But we also talked about not only the challenges, but the benefits of coupling REDD processes closer with peace processes and peace agreements. And one of the benefits is that peace agreements, they're naturally at a very high, or they're negotiated at a very high political level, spanning various sectors, which is also a goal of REDD programs, not to be limited to only the forest sector or the Ministry of Environment. And we've seen that in Colombia. Vice Minister Pablo Vieira Samper gave a really good overview of how this coupling is really central to the peace negotiations in Colombia. I think also Forest Trends made a really good argument of how important understanding conflict dynamics is. More than 30% the main red countries have a recent history of conflict. So it's, of course, imperative to be conflict sensitive. And just to go back to one of the metaphors that you used in the beginning, in these countries, the legacy of conflict is in the room. If you want, it could be the dog in Francis's father's room. And if you try to understand it and work with it, it should be fine. But if you try to ignore it, it's like asking the dog to just wipe out your whole jigsaw puzzle.
Okay, so we have another nomination for what's the dog? The dog is the unaddressed conflict situations. Thank you, Heidi. That's great. So let me move on to Nonette and ask for projection of the answers to question number 5 for now. So as you'll remember, question number 5 was the one about opportunities and risks for indigenous peoples. And Nonette was very much involved in planning that session. So Nonette, are you surprised by these results?
Not at all. And in fact, I am very pleased that it is not just indigenous peoples that feel this way, but all sectors, all of those institutions that are represented here, both government, private sector, civil society, and are in agreement. And that is that it is an opportunity, RED should be used, but also it is a risk at the same time, and that in many of the panel discussions similar, this is recognized, and that safeguards and monitoring compliance with those safeguards instruments is very important. So it is very positive in that sense that there's a consensus among everybody. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Could I ask you to call up question number 1, please? We have Hege Ragnildsveit. How did I do? Okay.
You're doing right.
From NICFI. And Hege is someone who spans the range from the high political levels down to the field. But I'm going to throw to her the question about, the importance of the RED Plus and the Paris Agreement. So, Hege, give us some commentary on the results of this question about what's the most important element of the RED Plus and the Paris Agreement.
Well, the discussions, I think, both in the plenaries as well as sort of out in the lobby, where, of course, many of the most interesting discussions take place, is that there is a strong political signal for the implementation of RED Plus after the Paris Agreement, especially with the paragraph 5 in the Paris Agreement, which is, of course, very encouraging to everyone here. There's also a lot of stress on the importance of the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, and how they will be used in raising the ambitions at the country level for each country's ambitions, and also I think great optimism in this crowd that the ambitions on RED Plus will raise accordingly.
Great.
Yeah.
So for Rosa, I want to find one related to the subnational level implementation. So could you please bring up number 6? So Rosa Vidal is the head of the Governor's Climate and Forest Task Force Fund, the GCF fund. So very much focuses on subnational level implementation of RED. So let's start on number 6. What would be your comment about those results?
Well, as in other panels, I think that our panel was looking at the positive options and how we can learn from the experience in the Maya region, especially. And we talk about thinking in the puzzle. I think that we were talking about the characteristics that your father had. For example, the commitment. We talk about the need of bringing national, subnational linkages through will, and to the continuity of working together. I think that those issues are behind the processes that we are trying to promote. And working in subnational jurisdictions really requires the political will of other levels of government, but also international institutions, and requires capacity. I mean, it's not easy to put together a puzzle. And it's not easy to facilitate governance in a jurisdiction. You have to be persistent. You have to have continuity after one government finish, and the next government has to recognize the work from previous one. And talking about how jurisdictions that are working together, like in the Mayan region, has been able to do that because they're part of a network. So if in one state the government changed, there is the other states to support that the process has a continuity. So we were talking more about all that, how to put together the puzzle, how to keep working, and how to make the dog out of the room.
So I just want to say I did not coerce my committee members to follow along with the metaphor of the puzzle. This is all voluntary. Okay, I want to keep question number 6 up there because Peter Minang, World Agroforestry Center, ICRAF, was the moderator of the session on Mayandombe, which is, of course, an important example of a subnational implementation of REDD model. Peter, what's your comment on these results? Is that consistent with the discussions that you had in that session?
Yeah, I think largely yes, except for the fact that the insufficient political will was a factor that wasn't present that wasn't the case in Mayandombe. I think in Mayandombe there is sufficient political will that has really moved the process forward. But I think overall, in terms of the things that emerge from the discussions, are really spot on in terms of all of the other factors, especially drivers of deforestation, because in the session that we had in 4A as well on the projects, there were issues around thinking outside the box in terms of looking at big drivers as opposed to smallholder drivers. In that case, there was a lot of emphasis on that. And there was a discussion, I think, in the session on projects about projects being time-bound and REDD Plus not supposed to be time-bound. So there was a bit of a conflict there, and that's why I think the answer in question 8, which is about moving more towards subnational level, is extremely important as a very strong factor going forward in terms of implementation. But there was also caution in the session that jurisdictional REDD is not easy as well, right? In Mayandombe, we saw a lot of issues about especially on the technical side, about defining the drivers of deforestation in Mayandombe province coming from Kinshasa, which is a neighboring province. And how do you manage that in terms of setting out the technical issues on baselines and reference levels and leakage in many ways?
Since Peter brought it up, can we flash the results for question number 9 about the emphasis across the different levels? So this is pretty striking to me about how there seems to be a pretty strong convergence around the importance of subnational jurisdictions, and it even grew between yesterday and today. So, any further comment on that?
Yeah, I think one of Jorge from Peru summarized it really well in his statement, because he said that one of the big things is about synergy between the initiatives at subnational level and projects and the political level, policy level actions. And notably, tenure was cited as one of those things that really need to work together with the initiatives at that level. Big drivers have to be addressed at policy level as well, not necessarily at the subnational and project level. If there's no synergy between the policy level at national level and the project level, then there is a disconnect. And I think that leads to something really important going forward in REDD Plus, especially with subnational levels. How do you nest the subnational level to the national level, both in terms of monitoring MRV, but also in terms of benefit sharing and looking at I think there was a big issue from Wildlife Works, Mike, talking about translating the benefits at national level to the local level where the action really happens. So that sort of multiple scale linkages I think it's probably the biggest challenge going forward. But I also think that there was really one important issue that emerged both in Mayandombe and in the project session, was that we need to really think clearly how we move towards performance-based payments.
Can we call up the answer to number 7, the responses to question number 7, which was the one about project scale, since you're addressing that?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so the highest is the drivers of deforestation outside the influence of the project.
Yeah. So I think that was really the question of performance-based payments. How do you incentivize people? And there was a lot of discussion about big drivers, big plantation companies like in Maindombe. How do you get them interested in the whole emission reduction scheme? There has to be specific incentives for them. And if we don't get to those incentives at the moment, and there was a sense of how complex that would be, and that we need to get thinking really hard about that and all the benefit sharing schemes,
Okay.
by and large.
So let's use that to pivot back up to the national level. And Heidi, I'll put you on the spot. And can we see the answers to question number 2, please? So this was the one about the most important constraint to REDD+ implementation at the national level, with the lack of awareness, insufficient international finance, weak institutions, lack of political consensus on how, but by far the most votes went to the strong vested interests in deforestation as usual. So
Yeah.
Heidi, do you have any insights on
I
that?
think it's another way of saying it's not us, it's them. But I think we're targeting those vested interests, I think, in a lot of the different sessions, trying to encourage private sector actions, and yeah, maybe others in the panel have comments.
Rosa?
Yeah, in the case of the session on the Mayan region and subnational implementation, we talk a lot about the financial architecture. And I think it's very much related of what Peter just mentioned on what type of incentives are needed. And then it comes, private sector as one of the major players in bringing those other options. So we end talking about a more complex approach. It's like really trying to see REDD into the development agenda and trying to see how different instruments, even a lot of subnational governments are putting advanced investments from their own programs in order to be part of the performance-based payment. So it's very complex. I think that when you start bringing all these scales together, you have to also think in how you are going to move from this project previous thinking on a more, integration of policies, actors, landscapes, and finance.
Okay, great. Let's bring up the answer to question number 3. This was about new and additional sources of finance. And Hege, I'm going to put you on the spot for that one. I want to ask you, were you surprised at the answers to this question? And how do you think these answers would have differed if we'd done this poll at the first Oslo Redd Exchange? I didn't tell Warner about that
but that's
question.
right. I was at the first and as well as the second, so I Redd Exchange. So I should be able to compare those. The results are not surprising. I think we had a very interesting discussion yesterday on finance, and we learned about a very interesting initiative from the India Finance Commission, a very innovative approach to how how local governments can benefit from fiscal transfers. And we also had a big discussion on innovation, and several panelists stressed the need for innovation in REDD finance and the use of different financial instruments, both grants, results-based payments, as well as green bonds and conditional loans. So there's obviously a lot of sort of creative minds in the whole climate finance that can be put to good use, and who are eager to contribute. I think one answer that did not come up here, it was not an option, but different panelists have touched upon it, is the contributions from the private sector. And I think at the local level, there was an interesting discussion this morning about East Kalimantan in Indonesia, where different transfers and incentives from the central government towards the province government was discussed, as well as the private sector. And this is good because it actually came from the private sector representative, and she underlined that private sector itself needs to invest in zero deforestation policies and are already doing that. So yes, private-public partnerships can be a part of this picture. I think if we go back like 6 years. 6 years ago was the first Redd Exchange. I'm sort of looking at the screen here. If I should think about what we would have voted, we would not have gone for the Green Climate Fund because that was too early. So we're thinking about that now. The market, I think, would have been much higher up if we go 6 years back, and obviously that has changed. But it's still being discussed, but it doesn't seem to be so much on the front burner.
Okay, Peter, you wanted to jump in?
Yes, I think the Maindombe example is a great example of sort of blended smart financing coming into play really on the ground, because I think there was a discussion around, FCPF money doing the readiness bids, FIP and other investments doing the investment parts, and then the biocarbon fund coming into on the performance-based side of the story. But in between, there was a $10 million, sort of private sector investment in the process as well. So that's really concrete. I think if you look at the graph, what is missing is sort of the whole domestic dimension of the story, which is the biggest.
Last one.
Exactly.
That is the last one, yeah.
I think in that puzzle, what is missing is the domestic bits.
I see, in Maindombe.
So, yeah, exactly, in Maindombe. So looking at the green bonds and looking at things like that, which should be some stage that if we got to that stage in Maindombe, that would be a really good example of sort of blended and smart financing that you need to see more of within the Redd Plus domain, as it were.
Excellent. Okay, could we have the results for question 8, please? So this was the one on the application of new technology, which was the focus of session 4C just now. And Nonette, you were involved in helping arrange that one. Not a lot of change from one day to the next, although some between the last two answers. So any reflections you might have about how that relates to the discussion in that session or elsewhere?
Honestly, I was not in that session. I did not attend it, but I am very positive, and there was affirmation from side discussions that it is for enhanced monitoring. So this technology assists that, but there is also the value, especially in the current conduct of mapping and land use, participatory land use planning of indigenous peoples. There is a substantial contribution to that amount of information produced and generated in that process. So both social and technical processes that attend this type of tools in monitoring. Yeah, forest cover.
What strikes me is that, if we added the two middle columns together, so sort of public sector law enforcement and civil society accountability enforcement for supply chain commitments, you would actually end up with enforcement being, the biggest compared to the other two. Any other comments on this one? Hege, please.
I did follow some of that session. And I think what's interesting to see now is how MRV is also being used to inform policy decisions.
Can you give an example that came out of that session?
Well, for monitoring drivers of deforestation, which varies, of course, from country to country, and finding maybe the appropriate regulations to regulate those drivers based on an MRV system.
Okay.
So that, I think, was very interesting. And again, the puzzle metaphor did appear, Francis. And I think it's very useful when it comes to MRV, because obviously it is about collecting a number of very different data from very different data sources and putting it together in systems at the national level. And it was a very interesting exchange of ideas between Brazil and Guyana. Of course, two countries that are at very sort of have different deforestation challenges, but they could obviously exchange ideas and talk to each other about how to develop new technology and share experiences on going forward.
Okay. Rosa, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I want to comment not on the panel, but in the exchanges that happens during coffee breaks. And I think this is one of the topics that we are currently discussing more and more. What type of information we need for what type of purpose, how we do it in an efficient way. There are needs from private sector, from governments, from communities, indigenous peoples. And it seems to be that mapping, database monitoring is still a big thing. And I think that we are going to continue discussing that in the following months and probably years. I hope that we can do it in a fashion that we can concluded soon, because talking technology indicators, it could take us forever. And I think that we have to be okay with something that can help us moving forward and not trying to find the perfect for everything.
Okay. May I ask you to project the answers to question number 10? So this is the one about the best way to secure permanence in REDD+ results. And for this one, I'm going to ask all of you to use this to sort of make a last comment about the implications of everything that you've heard at this conference. Oh, I'm sorry. I've just gotten a red message that tells me that our special guests are coming forward, or is this just that the time is going down? Just the time. Sorry, no. So it's, be calm. We have time. Thank you, though, for the alert. No, this just means that the originally allotted time is running out, but we don't have the word that they're on their way. Okay, so Heidi, though, if I'm going to let you go last since you weren't prepared for this question. So maybe Peter, I'll start at your end. So looking at these results about making the stronger connections between REDD+ and domestic green economy transitions as being, on both days a very strong result, but a good spread across many different answers. What would be your reflections, just looking over the whole conference, about, what this means to you for priorities going forward?
Yeah, I think by and large, yes, in terms of the strongest answer being linking to green economy, because in Africa, if you look at all of the REDD strategies, it's about REDD+ on the one, emission reductions on the one hand, but on the other hand, it's about non-carbon benefits, right? Which they've pushed very strongly, in the discussion so far. And I think if we don't make those connections, then in many instances, my argument would be at $5 a ton, no one is really going to be working on REDD+ mainly. I think people will see REDD+ as a complement, as one more reason to do something, but they wouldn't do something because it's REDD+ only. It's an extremely important reason, but it's not the only reason. So I think if we don't make those connections, then we'll largely miss the boat. And I think it's the best opportunity going forward in terms of, and I think we see that now with a lot of the country strategies and the way in which Indonesia has shaped the 1542-7 or something like that. I think it's sort of the model that we really need to look at going forward. I would agree with that, but quite a good mix of things that need to come into place. Yeah.
Okay. Rosa, are you surprised that the one about linkage to commodity supply chain commitments didn't get more?
Well, I think that looking at the graph, I just think that really it's going to be a combination of all those issues. I think that for me, the one that has a stronger votes are not because it's the first step. I think it's the result. I mean, it's more like green economy is something big, right? So I think that some of the other ones are processes that we need to cover. I really think that governance is a big thing. The question here was national. Maybe if we frame it in a different way, that could come higher also in the voting. I think that there is a focus on increasing the governance in the hands of indigenous peoples of the forest, and I think that is a big component of permanence too. So I will say that maybe we have to revisit our concepts here, and I guess that we need to find a way that we could put the steps, the process, to ensure permanence in a smart way. But I think that bringing REDD into development agenda, basically, it is the key thing.
So can I ask you, which one did you vote for? Do you remember how you voted on this question?
I think I voted with the private sector commodity supply chain commitment.
Okay. And I think some of the private sector people have left, so maybe it's a selection bias, those who are voting in this round. Okay, Hege, your reflections.
I'm not surprised at this, and I was thinking, of course, REDD+ is implemented both in least developed countries and in middle-income countries. And for it to be sort of a sellable idea, many different kinds of developing countries have to be included. And we, of course, from the donor side, need to be aware that it's countries with many different sorts of challenges. So I think I'm not at all surprised, because linking RED to other development challenges, the Sustainable Development Goals have been mentioned, of course, in a number of times, which again is linked to green economy. And I think it also relates to the need to see sort of outside the forest sector that many of the drivers of deforestation are found maybe in mining or energy or in agriculture. So by linking RED to wider green development plans, one's able to address also the drivers of deforestation in a different way. I think it's also encouraging that the rights and governance in the national RED program gets a good vote, and I think that also reflects many of the discussions we've had. Transparency and accountability, both when it comes to finance and MRV, keeps coming up. So yeah, I think it's a good and interesting options. I wonder also, like Rosa said, if we had framed the options in different ways, we will also have had different answers. So yeah.
And do you remember how you voted on this question?
Yes, I did actually vote for the winner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Peter, I didn't ask you how you voted. How did you vote on this one?
For the winner as well.
For the winner as well. Okay, yeah. This is the beauty of anonymous voting. Nobody really knows, you know. Okay. Nonette.
I voted for rights and governance, and I think there's a cusp. I am looking at Abdon right now, who is smiling. He kept saying, and he has repeatedly said this, that for hundreds of years, communities have been protecting and defending forests. And if those rights were recognized, immediately you can harvest the results for RED. And why aren't we doing that? Isn't that the most logical option? And so I would just echo that. And he said that at the beginning, so we all heard that. But I do feel consistently in all those sessions that I attended that welfare and the basic non-carbon needs are actually always emerging as a very important incentive for then again guarding the same areas that we care about. So it is for us no-brainer. We need to support the rights so that we have partners in guarding these areas.
So there were several tweetable comments in what Nonette just said, for those of you who are tweeting. Okay, Heidi?
Yes, I agree with both Nonette and Hege, and see that there is a slight increase in the rights and governance response. It's a strong number 2, and Aman and others have argued very well how important it is for all RED countries, and perhaps in particular for post-conflict countries, which have even more complicated rights and tenure issues with refugees that want to return to their territories and overlapping land claims. So I think those two are very important, both.
And how did you vote?
I did vote for number 2, rights and governance.
Okay. So, Hans, if I can see you, would it be possible to slice some of present some of the sliced data, you know, like by gender or something, or you can? Yes, thumb is up. Okay, well, just for a fun exercise, let's start with this one, question number 10, and see if male or female made any difference in the voting. It's going to be hard to see because it's like this many bars times 2, but just to show you what you can look for in the conference report, because the demographic information that you entered, we will have all of the answers by that slice. Okay. So, So we have stronger female support for the links with green economy, whereas the guys were more into the NDC thing, and the women much stronger on the rights thing. Not much, but a little bit stronger on the rights. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? Any others you want to see by gender? Anybody have a hypothesis that there would be a difference? Panel?
The money bit.
Which one?
The money bit. The money part. I like to see number 3, I think, on the money, on the finance.
Oh, on finance, yes. Okay, let's go back to question number 3, and by gender. See, the only eyeball difference I see that's significant would be between the markets. Guys are more into the markets than the women. Go figure, you know? Okay, this is maybe complex, but I'd like to try one by region, and maybe this finance one would be interesting. Can we do this question number 3 by Latin America, Asia, Africa? Oh, that was quick. Okay. Oh, so Africa, much less interested in the markets, much more interested in the Green Climate Fund. Otherwise, not so much variation. Okay. And then let's go ahead and do this same question by institutional affiliation. Okay. Wow, interesting. So government's much more interested in domestic fiscal policies than the private sector. And marginally, government's more interested in the new pledges or more likely in the public finance than the private sector. Civil society, somewhere in between. Oh, and a big difference between civil society confidence in new pledges of bilateral funding than the private sector seems to be hoping for. Very interesting. Noting that we have a relatively small sample from the private sector based on our polling yesterday. Any other requests from the panel?
Could we get number 2 by continent?
Question number 2 by continent. And to refresh your memory, question number 2 is the one about the most important constraint on national level implementation. Okay, so it looks like government thought that finance was the issue, whereas civil society and private sector thought much more.
But by continent, not...
Oh, sorry, by continent. Let's just try that one by continent. Wow, Africa does not have a problem with political consensus on how to achieve the objectives. Much bigger issue in Latin America and Asia.
And Asia has enough international finance, it seems.
Apparently. And then it's pretty bad when NORAD is the one making that conclusion. So those of you who voted that way, you had your chance. Okay. Any others that you want to see?
Is the one on the indigenous peoples? So if we could have that broken down by continent as well, or by sector.
Okay.
Affiliation.
Question number 5. Let's actually we can run through all the slices. So start indigenous rights. Question number 5. First by gender. No significant difference on that one. Okay, let's try it by institutional affiliation. Not a huge difference. And then let's try by continent. Not a big difference in any of those.
Interesting.
Last one? No?
It's interesting that there's not that big differences.
It is.
The subnational one, the 6th, I think is the 6th one, the constraints for implementation of subnational.
Yes, okay, question number 6. And let's do it for all 3 slices. So question number 6 by gender. Guys a little more focused on finance and a little more focused on insufficient support from the national level. Okay, by institutional affiliation. Well, I'm sorry, but the screen just turned yellow. And that means that we have to cut off this fascinating discussion right now. Let me ask you to join me in applause in thanking our wonderful panelists. And you are invited to leave the stage.